Okay, so this will be items, runes, and sums for LeBlanc. Let's talk about the starting items first. So there's only really two choices, which is Corrupting Pot or Doran's Ring. You should kind of default to Corrupting Potion on LeBlanc. So the reason that Corrupting is normally better is Corrupting is better if you're going to be trading back and forth quite a lot. Like you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and they will be as well. It's also quite good if you're having kind of more extended trades when you're fitting in extra auto attacks and stuff, which is definitely something that LeBlanc looks to do. So kind of default to this. But if you end up in a matchup where it's just you hitting them, either because it's like a tank or just someone that doesn't hit back, like they're very weak early, like a Vega or a Corki or something, then you can go Doran's Ring for a bit of extra kind of early strength. It does also make CSing easier, and that's something that I know a lot of people struggle with on LeBlanc, so yeah, I don't know. If you really struggle with that super, like, yeah, it's like a lot, then you could probably start it. But I think overall, I normally go Corrupting Potion, and I think it is better overall. Also worth noting, if you're taking TP, which you probably won't in LeBlanc solo queue most of the time, but if you are, Corrupting Potion synergizes really well with TP. And some kind of difficult poke matchups, you sort of need to take TP, especially if you don't have a ganking jungler, so that's going to be pretty important. So basically, TLDR, most of the time, start Corrupting. If it's an easier matchup, let's go Doran's. So for your early buys, it's actually pretty simple most of the time. You're pretty much always going to be wanting to go for a Darksteel, like LeBlanc. Darksteel, really good. You're very mobile, so you shouldn't die very often. You can get stacks really easy, and your enchantment snowballs really well, so it's amazing. Tier 1 boots are really important in a lot of matchups on LeBlanc because you're not going to be like super hard roaming, but you will be at least skirmishing in the river quite a lot. And boots is really good for that. And also boots are great at dodging skill shots, which is again very important for LeBlanc's lane. So I find very often that I'm going for something like Darksteel boots really early. You might also consider refillable. Like if you're starting Doran's Ring, you probably want to go refillable or something in here. Because again, like LeBlanc is a champ that can't really avoid taking at least some damage in trades because she has to go forward. So you're going to want some sort of sustain, and if you didn't start corrupting, it should probably be refillable. For your kind of other big buys, Lost Chapter is kind of your gold standard. It allows you to just keep trading, lots of mana, lots of AP. Everyone knows this is kind of just like the best mage item overall if you can get it. And then you've got your defensive items. So to be honest, Seekers kind of sucks. It's sort of like the thing with Seekers is it's good at neutralizing lanes, right? But it's not actually that good at winning lanes. And the thing is, while LeBlanc isn't like a horrible champion, if she like doesn't get ahead, it's also if you delay your item spikes as LeBlanc, it's very painful. So like if you're in a really difficult matchup, you can go Seekers to help survive, like something like a Zed. But honestly, I would try not to buy it. Like you only want to buy it if you absolutely can't play the game without it. And normally I think just building towards like the loot and spike and then going Zhonya's after is probably better. But again, if you absolutely need it, you can go it. And Merc Treads can be pretty good in a lot of matchups. So in a lot of LeBlanc's matchups, right, she needs to go quite far in. So against champions like Zoe, Syndra, those are like the two that come to mind. Like the tenacity is really important as well as the magic resist and movement speed, right? So the tenacity makes it so you don't just die in the stuns or the sleeps, and also the movement speed for dodging abilities. So there's a lot of those matchups where it can be good. You can go Sorks early as well. We'll talk about that a lot, but most of the time I prefer to go like tier 1 boots, Lost Chapter, and then think about Sorks and stuff, as opposed to like just rushing Sorks, because the problem with rushing Sorks on LeBlanc is that it doesn't actually help you in the 1v1 as much as you'd think. Obviously, it's like really good damage-wise, but it means you lack AP, so it's hard to actually push the wave. And that's pretty important because the way LeBlanc trades is at around level 8 or so, she actually orders the backline once, W's onto it, or orders it twice depending on how much AP you have, and then you like look for a chain so they can't hide behind their creeps. The problem is if you don't have that AP, it actually kind of denies you from being able to do that trade, which is where a lot of your kills are going to come from. So personally, I would only build these if you really need them. Otherwise, just stick to these 4 items here. Good options, as we said before. Merc Treads, really good against AP and CC on LeBlanc. Don't hesitate to buy these. Obviously, like, Sork Shoes are really good on the champ, right? Like, no doubt about it. But the thing is, as LeBlanc, you will pretty much always be CC'd in a fight at some point, right? Like, if they have champs like Leona or Lux or... what are other, like, sort of meta things? Maybe Ashe. Like, you're always going to be hit by some CC, and it's much better to go Ignite and Mercs than it is to go Cleanse and Sorks, at least in my opinion. So... yeah, if you see lots of CC on their team, don't hesitate to buy Mercs. It'll make a massive difference. At the same time, Sork Shoes is definitely more damage. And last one is CDR Boots. So I don't often buy these on LeBlanc, but when I do, it's normally because I base on an awkward amount of gold and I have nothing else to buy. Or if I'm versus a bunch of tanks, flat magic pen is not as valuable because they have a lot of magic resist. And so instead you might want CDR. But typically I go one of these, sometimes I go Lucidity. For your standard build, pretty simple. We're just going to be going like the typical assassin build of Luden's Sorks as our start. Normally Shadow Flame second, unless this needs to be a Zhonya's or something. So the thing is, you pretty much always want to pick up Rabadon's Void or Void Rabadons as your third and fourth items, because they just do the most damage, right? So if you really need a defensive item, like a Zhonya's or Banshees, which we'll like talk about those, you kind of need to buy it second. And then like build your Shadow Flame later, or even build like a different item last, because you can't go something like Zhonya's and Shadow Flame because it just delays these items too much. So basically, your Ludens and Sorks are basically set in stone. Your second item is situational. And then it's like, do we need Rabadons or Void? So if they don't have magic resist, you go Rabadons. If they do have magic resist, like a lot of it, probably like at least the Merc Treads on everyone, or just like some Hex Drinkers, some Maws coming through, you know, that sort of stuff, with ends. That's when you can consider going Void. Sometimes, if you're really behind, it can actually be worth going Void second, or if they just have MR super early in the game. The problem with this is it does give you like sort of low AP, but sometimes you kind of just have to. Like if they get that much MR early, you kind of don't have a choice. So that can be an option. Most of the time, though, your build's probably going to look something like this. And then you can kind of situationally pick up the last item as well. Alternative mythics, there's really only two, and I don't go for them very often. So if you're the kind of person that's going to play LeBlanc every game, you might need to consider Liandry some of the time. Personally, I try not to pick LeBlanc into tankier comps, but if you end up versus a tankier comp, Liandry is actually pretty good on the champ, because while the burn's like not amazing, the ability haste is actually really good. Like LeBlanc really benefits from ability haste as well, especially against tankier targets. Like you can keep them chained, you can just like keep kiting them around with dash, so it can be very valuable. But yeah, I think it's like you shouldn't want to build this. It's just, again, some games you might have to, and it's still a decent option, to be honest. Second one here is Everfrost. So if you need more HP, it's normally better to go Everfrost than something like Roa or Crown, because it spikes a bit earlier. And also, it can be kind of nice to root people to help guarantee your E. At the same time, though, I normally feel like, you know, if you need the HP, I'd rather go defensive item second, like Zhonya's. Like, I'd rather go Luden Zhonya's than I would say, like, Crown Shadow Flame. You know what I mean? Or, like, Everfrost Shadow Flame. I'd rather have the damage from the Mythic and then kind of sort out my safety later, rather than kind of gimping myself. But it can be good if you end up, like, on a Welfare LeBlanc build. It's an option. So for items, there's actually a lot of different things. First one, I guess we'll talk about actually is healing reduction. Healing reduction is a lot better now after the buff. I still think you generally don't want to buy it unless you need it, because you'll be bringing healing reduction from your Ignite a lot of the time. But there, I don't know, if you've heard something like a Vlad or a Silas, it can be tempting. To be honest, though, sometimes versus those champs, you actually need mana anyway. Like, a lot of the time, if I knew my jungler was going to give me blue, I'd probably go Oblivion Orb, but otherwise, I think I'd still just go mana and maybe think about this as, like, a second item. Whether or not I'd actually upgrade it, I probably wouldn't. I feel like upgrading to Morello normally sucks. So, yeah, it's like, if you need lots of healing reduction, you can buy it. Ideally, though, look to buy other items. Cosmic's kind of fallen off quite a bit, but the reason I mention it is because it's getting buffed next patch to have more AP and less health, so that might be something that we can start to consider instead of Shadow Flame second, but at least for now, it's just not really as good, but I'm putting it here kind of future-proofing. Medjai's, so Medjai's is really, really, really good on the block. So you just like you snowball insanely hard, and it's a champ where if you play well, you shouldn't die. That being said, if you're new to LeBlanc, or if they have lots of point and click CCs, so stuff like the Sandra ult, Vi ult, you definitely shouldn't buy this, because if you throw with Medjai's, you lose the game really quickly. So if you're buying this, it's because you know you're not going to die. You're confident either in your play, or that they just like don't have the threat to really punish you for it. And that's when you can look for something like that. Next, Zhonya and Banshee. These can both be situational second items or as last items. Or they can even replace Void if they don't have MR. So both of these are actually reasonable on LeBlanc. Like, Banshee's it kind of like helps you engage and not just like die straight away against certain champs. Personally, though, I normally rather go Mercs than build Banshees, and you definitely don't want to build both. Like, if you're going Mercs Banshees, I mean, I guess you can if they have like just tons of AP CC, like I'd think about it then. But I'm not normally buying it unless they have like tons of AP on their team and I really need the MR. Zhonya can be a bit more lenient with. Like, Zhonya, It's like a pretty decent second item. The thing is, it does reduce your damage by quite a bit, but against certain champs like Zed or Fizz, it completely hard counters them. But a lot of the time, like, it's important not to buy this unless, again, you need it. Because if you can ever just outplay it, it's normally better to do that because you can get a lot more damage by going something else. But if it can't be outplayed or you don't feel confident in it, then you can pick these up either as, yeah, your second item, like replacing Shadow Flame, or you can get a bit later as, like, your last item. Touchbane is another item that's pretty good last. So LeBlanc actually weaves in quite a lot of auto attacks, and it's also really good for split pushing, and the movement speed's really nice. So you can't really buy it early in the game, like it just doesn't really fit, right? Like you can't buy it second, third, and fourth item. It doesn't do as much damage as these. But it can be a really good last item, and yeah, it's definitely worth picking up in the ultra late game. Now moving over to runes. So 99% of the time on LeBlanc, you're going to want to go something like this. This will give you like a reasonably strong early game while also giving you some scaling. You can change a few things around with this. For example, if you don't need Taste of Blood for the early game, like you don't need the healing at all, you can get more lethality with sudden impact. Another thing you can do is you can swap Ultimate Hunter to Treasure Hunter if you feel like you're going to pick up lots of kills. In fact, I would maybe default to this because I think a lot of the time Ultimate Hunter, you don't actually use ulti on cooldown, although it depends on your lane. Like some lanes you can really do a lot, but at the same time, Ulti Hunter is not super good for the lane, right? So really personal preference between these two. I think Treasure Hunter can be very nice. Ultimate Hunter can be very nice too. They're both pretty similar. I guess I'd default to Treasure Hunter, but I wouldn't make any other choices with these. Something else you can kind of consider here is if you want Scorch or not. So if you're against a melee champion that you can Q on cooldown over and over, it can be a good idea to take Scorch. If you're really good at LeBlanc, you know how to manage your mana, I would probably drop Mana Flow and take Scorch. However, if you're new to LeBlanc, I would definitely drop Transcendence and take Mana Flow instead, because I think managing mana on LeBlanc is one of the hardest things to do, at least when you're like new to her. So having the extra mana from Mana Flow will make a big difference. Also, I think that if you are playing an early game build, like this sort of stuff here, typically you need the mana to kind of punish your lane, right? Because you want to be queuing on cooldown. At the same time, again, if you're running this, you're probably running Doran's Rings. You might have a bit extra mana anyway. But yeah, basically this is kind of up to you as to what you want to min-max here. I guess like I default to this, Mana Flow Transcendence. It's good scaling. You can go, some variation of this, like including Scorch if you want to. Now, another build that's like much more niche but is like possible is the Aerie build. So this is the Aerie Qmax build where you just play for super early game, and you can kind of combine this with either you can go like Taste of Blood if you want the healing, or you can go something like Boost Cosmic or even Biscuits Cosmic. And this is, in my opinion, not very good, but it has some very niche situations. Like if you're a Sylas, for example, Qmax LeBlanc is very punishing, especially if they don't build Rod of Ages or they don't go like Doran's Shield, because you can just like Q them on cooldown and it makes it really difficult for them. But outside of the 1v1, it kind of makes you like Victor in a way. Like you're very good 1v1, but it makes your skirmishing very weak. So keep that in mind, and generally I just go for this. Another thing you can consider is swapping swapping Sorcery over to Inspiration. You would probably take Biscuits here, or if you're new to LeBlanc, you might find DMAT makes it a bit easier to farm. Personally, though, I don't think it's as good, and I just think if you take this, it's going to do you well in like 99% of games, and I wouldn't worry about it too much beyond that. It's really, there's a little bit of optimization, right, like we said, but for the most part, like this is the best LeBlanc page, and has been for a very long time. And finally, the Summoners, like 90% of games, you're going to take Flash and Ignite. It's really good for snowballing, it's really good for helping kill squishy late game, because it's point and click true damage. The only times you wouldn't run Flash Ignite would be if you need Flash Cleanse, because they just have tons of CC. So like I honestly very rarely do this. Like even against Lissandra, I normally prefer to just go Mercs, but I guess maybe versus like Zoe, if you're not that confident, you could build it. Or if they just, I don't know, had, what would a comp be? Something like Ashe, Lissandra, Sejuani, where you might need Merc Treads and Cleanse. But again, I would maybe be thinking that's just not a great LeBlanc game. If you end up on that though, Cleanse should probably be the play. Last one is TP. So this is really good in matchups where you either can't do a whole lot and you just want to instead play for like maximizing farm. So it's quite good against tanks. Or just like matchups where you don't have a lot of kill pressure. Like To be honest, in solo queue, I almost always take Flash Ignite on LeBlanc anyway. Like, when I play versus Sandra in solo queue, I normally take Flash Ignite because I know I can kill them because they're probably bad. But honestly, it's better to take Flash DP in the matchup because it'll help keep you healthy. It'll just mean you can kind of scale better. And it allows you to side lane in the mid game. A lot of champions like Lissandra that sort of counter LeBlanc early actually kind of struggle in the side lane versus her. So keep that in mind as well. TP can really play towards that win condition as well. I wouldn't really take anything else. Yeah, I just don't really think you need anything else. I guess the only other thing would be exhaust, but I don't think I've ever run exhaust on LeBlanc. So yeah, 90% of the time, Flash Ignite. Maybe consider Flash Cleanse or Flash TP, just depending on how difficult the matchup is. If you verse something really strong in lane, like a Zia, definitely Flash TP with Corrupting. Like, you just need the sustain. But yeah, I think that's it for LeBlanc. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the runes, items, or the subs.